Castel, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
You're going to tell us how to build up and keep our memory. But let's start by asking, what is memory? Or rather, how do you conceptualize memory from the standpoint of we move through life, we experience things, let's call it passively, or we try to remember certain things. What determines what information we hold on to, how long, and so on?
It's a great question. And memory is really a mental representation of the past. And by its very nature, it's reconstructive. It's never always accurate. And I think that's why it's so mysterious and fascinating that you and I can see the same event and then remember it differently a week or a day later. And it starts kind of almost at the sensory level. And sometimes our mind plays tricks on us. And that's how I got interested in this field, that how can I think I know something and yet not know it as well as I do? And this is something that's called metacognition, our awareness of our own cognition. And as a personal anecdote, when I was in 5th or 6th grade, I had one line in the play The Wizard of Oz. It's a line I practiced again and again. Listen, everyone, there's a cyclone on the way. Hurry and get into the cellar. And of course, on opening night, listen, everyone, there's a cellar on the way. Hurry and get into the cyclone.
Nice.
And I was thinking, how did I manage that? Having memorized this line, most of the audience probably didn't even notice. But that to me was an early exposure to memory is not always kind of a function of what you do with the information. And then, in high school, I had another exposure to memory where I just memorized a lot of things. And that got me pretty far in algebra and chemistry. In fact, I almost memorized the entire periodic table. But this was using mnemonics, little rhymes or songs. And I realized in my first year of college that I really didn't have a strong understanding of chemistry, even though I could use all these terms. And thankfully, I took an introductory psychology class, and I realized people studied learning and memory and kind of false memories and why memory can and cannot be accurate. And I was hooked. I found that so fascinating, and I still do today.
I'm both impressed and intrigued to ask more about memorization of the periodic table. First question is about mnemonics and ways that we try and batch and learn information by pairing it to other things. I'm trying to remember a room full of people's names, and you could pair the first letter of their name with a fruit or what, people do these things. To me, that seems like a very inefficient way to learn because you're adding more information that you need to store away. So the first question is that the best way to learn large batches of information?
I think it's almost a workaround, and that's the first kind of problem people say is I can't remember names. And by their nature, names used to be descriptive of person's occupation. Someone's a baker, we call them Mr. Baker. But that's, of course, evolved with time. And names, I tell people, if you can't remember someone's name, that's probably a natural forgetting, but you remember if you had an interesting conversation or you remember if you can trust them. That's probably more important. So then to engage our kind of knowledge base so that we can remember names, we need to make this arbitrary link. And so I tell people my last name is Castel. Castel rhymes with pastel, and my grandfather used pastels, let's say. And so people can then make this link. But like you say, that's effortful. It takes time. It takes time away from kind of the essence of something else we could talk about. And it also leads to these kind of predictable memory errors. So people say, oh, I remember his name was Pastel, when in fact it's Castel. So I think we have to almost trick our memory into remembering things that might be somewhat arbitrary. And that becomes more pronounced as we get older. There's more Davids, there's more Andrews, and it's just more interference. And so to get around that, we have to, use deliberate practice, retrieval practice, use the name several times. But I tell my students, whose names I often forget, that I'll still remember topics we've talked about or, how they felt about something. And I think that's more important than sometimes just remembering a name.
To remember chemistry or some other subject that involves nomenclature, not everyday terms, unless you're a chemist, but to really understand the deeper mechanics of that thing and remember that, what are some better tools? I want to say, and I'm not a memory researcher, that it might be helpful to think in terms of verbs, not labels. So rather than thinking about a particular element just in terms of its name, but think about how it interacts with something else, or how it gives or receives a charge in certain conditions.
Absolutely. I think that's what you're looking for, is deeper learning, deeper semantic learning. And this has been referred to as levels of processing. So I was working at a very low level of processing when I'm, making up Happy Henry, for hydrogen and helium. But if you can start to visualize things or interact with them, and that's why we want to have, chemistry labs or places where I found chemistry very abstract. I think that's why I didn't really engage with it. But I found psychology to be something that we were interacting with every day. I was making these memory errors. I saw my parents and grandparents remembering and forgetting things. And I thought, how does that happen? And the brain is so complex that I don't think we'll ever completely understand, why this memory error might happen. But I think this awareness is really important. And a lot of good learning happens through making mistakes. I play piano and I struggle, but I know when I make a mistake, I'm going to have to work on this. And I see that with my children. You learn a lot by making these mistakes. And I think that illustrates also how our memory works, that just seeing something many times doesn't mean you'll remember it well. And this is a classic demonstration that, you've seen a penny many times. You don't remember all the features on the penny. I've updated that to the Apple logo. You've seen the Apple logo so many times. Of course, you know all the features. But then when you quiz people and test them, and I do this in my class, people aren't sure, is the bite on the left or the right-hand side? Is there a stem or a leaf? But if you make people draw it while they're looking at it, they're going to remember it better.
While they're looking at the actual...
While they're looking at it, or if they... Actually, the best way to remember something is to, again, failures. I'll have you draw it without looking at it, and you struggle, and wait, is it on the left or right? And is it a stem or a leaf? And you're starting to question all of these things. Then when you look at the logo again, you're going to engage in better learning than if you hadn't done that errorful kind of trial beforehand.
Even if you don't redraw it correctly.
Exactly. Yeah. So this sort of thing is, in a academic setting, we don't want failure. We want people to do well. But I think this sort of retrieval failure with some, corrective feedback is really beneficial. And that's kind of how you learn through life. You make mistakes and then you correct them. But if you're constantly just doing it the right way, you're not really noticing these features. And we've tried to extend this to other domains, like, it's called habituation. You stop noticing things around you, like where the nearest fire extinguisher is, let's say. And I guarantee, hopefully there's one somewhere nearby, and you've probably walked by it many times, but you stop noticing it. And it's only until you'll need it, you'll realize, wait, where is it? And so we've done this study where you have to, instead of me telling you where it is, you have to get up and find it. And so now you're engaging with the environment. You're going to go look for it and be like, gosh, it's been there the whole time. I've walked by it so many times. I've never noticed it. And I think that's the difference between seeing something and noticing it. So someone who studies vision, we know a lot of information reaches the retina, but then how much of it reaches our kind of more conscious level? And not all of it does. And I think that's what makes psychology interesting.
In today's financial landscape of constant market shifts and chaotic news, it's easy to feel uncertain about how to save and invest your money. Wealthfront is the solution that helps you take control of your money while managing risk. For nearly a decade, I've trusted Wealthfront to navigate this volatility. With the Wealthfront cash account, I can earn 3.3% annual percentage yield, or APY, on my cash from program banks. And I know my money is growing until I'm ready to spend it or invest it. One of the features I love about Wealthfront is that I have access to instant, no-fee withdrawals to eligible accounts 24/7. That means I can move my money where I need it without waiting. And when I'm ready to transition from saving to investing, Wealthfront lets me seamlessly transfer my funds into one of their expert-built portfolios. For a limited time, Wealthfront is offering the Huberman Lab audience an exclusive 0.75% APY boost over the base rate for 3 months, meaning you can get up to 4.05% variable APY on up to $150,000 in deposits. Over 1 million people already trust Wealthfront to save more, earn more, and build long-term wealth with confidence. If you'd like to try Wealthfront, you can go to wealthfront.com/Huberman to receive the boost offer and start earning 4.05% variable APY today. That's wealthfront.com/Huberman to get started. This is a paid testimonial of Wealthfront. Client experiences will vary. Wealthfront Brokerage is not a bank. The base APY is as of January 30th, 2026, and subject to change. For more information, please see the episode description. Today's episode is also brought to us by Helix Sleep. Helix Sleep makes mattresses and pillows that are customized to your unique sleep needs. Now, I've spoken many times before on this and on other podcasts about the fact that getting a great night's sleep is the foundation of mental health, physical health, and performance. When we aren't getting great sleep on a consistent basis, everything suffers. And when we are sleeping well and enough, our mental health, physical health, and performance in all endeavors improve markedly. Now, the mattress you sleep on makes a huge difference in the quality of sleep that you get each night. How soft it is or how firm it is all play into your comfort and need to be tailored to your unique sleep needs. If you go to the Helix website, you can take a brief 2-minute quiz and it will ask you questions such as, do you sleep on your back, your side, or your stomach? Maybe you know, maybe you don't. Do you tend to run hot or cold during the night? Things of that sort. You answer those questions and Helix will match you to the ideal mattress for you. For me, that turned out to be the Dusk, D-U-S-K mattress. I've been sleeping on a Dusk mattress for more than 4 years now, and it's been far and away the best sleep that I've ever had. If you'd like to try Helix, you can go to helixsleep.com/Huberman, take that 2-minute sleep quiz, and Helix will match you to a mattress that's customized for you. Right now, Helix is giving up to 27% off their entire site. Helix has also teamed up with TrueMed, which allows you to use your HSA, FSA dollars to shop Helix's award-winning mattresses. Again, that's helixsleep.com/Huberman to get up to 27% off. Yeah, the big revelation for me when learning about neuroplasticity, and it was such an obvious one once I heard it, was that if you can perform a mental or physical task, there's no reason for your brain to change. You clearly already have the circuits. So it's the gap between desired performance and current performance that actually triggers the opportunity for plasticity.
Yeah, and those can be uncomfortable positions, right? Where it's like, I don't know this.
Right.
Am I going to be able to learn it? And I think that's this metacognitive aspect of when are you aware of that? And a lot of learning now is unsupervised learning. You know, it's not that you're going in classrooms and teachers are telling you what to do. You want to learn a new instrument, you might do a lot of it on YouTube, right? You're going to try and figure it out. You want to learn a new language, you want to learn how to communicate with people. There's going to be a lot of trial and error. And I think kind of the best learners are the ones who persist, who are curious, because that's how you're going to get a lot of feedback, asking not just lots of questions, but the right questions.
Yeah, and I think the frustration and agitation, I do believe that's the release of catecholamines, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and those change the milieu around synapses and let them change. All the things that we want to avoid are the things that actually allow us to learn. It could be that people that are very good at learning and have this willingness to embrace so-called beginner's mind, like, like, okay, they're excellent in one domain and they're perfectly happy to be a raw beginner in a different domain. I always wonder if they experience agitation the same way that anyone else would, but that they don't have the same relationship to it. Like, oh, here's that autonomic arousal again, and here it is. And maybe they don't conceptualize it as frustration. So in terms of getting better at learning and remembering things, have you or any other laboratories parsed kind of people's framework around it? Like, I know there's a vast literature around growth mindset, but I'm thinking more in terms of how people think about their own levels of frustration. Because if you go, oh, like, here I am, frustrated again, awesome, let's go. Now's the opportunity versus, like, I'm terrible at this. I know I should push through. I just wonder whether or not mindset can actually make a difference.
I think it can. I think our goals can play a big role. A lot of the learning we do is sometimes, learning to take a test or learning, something because it'll be on a test. But as we get through life, we realize if you're interested in bird watching or music or skateboarding, a lot of this is going to be observational learning. It's going to be talking to other people. So I think it comes down to the curiosity, which is almost closing this knowledge gap where here I am, but I want to be here. How can I get from here to here? And some of it is there's a strong motivation there. And that's something we've started to study with older adults as well, because we know memory declines happen with age, but not all things change equally. And in fact, there are certain memory systems that might actually remain stable or even improve. And I think some of the keys here are curiosity, being interested in, listening to a podcast, talking to someone else, closing that knowledge gap, and then kind of extending that and going further. And I sometimes find there's topics that I'm not so interested in, but then there's some that I will almost become obsessive about. That it's like, I'm going to watch that YouTube video and the next one and the next one, and then it's 45 minutes later. And I think that can be, kind of a waste of time in some ways, but it shows that our brain is craving this information. And that's something that I'm really curious about how that will change as we get older. And some of our research suggests that as we get older, we're more selective about what we focus on. And I think that can be beneficial. So maybe you don't waste as much time on trying to learn everything, but you're more focused on the things you want to learn about.
Do we know that it's important to continue to seek out new information as we get older in order to maintain our memory? Or is it sufficient to just make some effort to remember the past, what we need to do to get through our day? I think this gets down to the question people think, I really should be striving to keep my memory. Everyone wants to keep their memory. Sure, that makes sense. But how hard should people push to learn new information as opposed to maintaining what they've got?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a little bit of both, and you want to have that sort of balance. So if you play piano, my father in his 80s and 90s still plays piano. I don't think he's learning new pieces, but he's strengthening the pieces he knows, and that keeps him sharp. On the other hand, being exposed to new things, if you're traveling, if you're talking to different people, that can be really important for things like even neurogenesis. You want to, develop new brain cells, which we know doesn't just stop as we, reach a certain age. So it's probably a bit of both. And people ask me, what's the best thing to keep my brain sharp? Is it crossword puzzles? And that's interesting because I think as we get older, our actual verbal knowledge is maintained, if not improved. So in a way, you're strengthening a strength. And I think that can be beneficial, but probably the other things to do are do new things, go outside and appreciate the birds, or talk to someone who has a different perspective, or you go to a different restaurant even. All of these things I find as I get older, I have a lot of routines, but it's when I start to violate these routines, take a different way to work, or, try something different at a restaurant, I can almost feel like, wow, that was a different experience today. I did something else. And I think both are really important.
We do get set in our ways. That's a real thing.
Habits can be healthy, and we can talk more about that, because those routines, I drove this way and I didn't get into a car accident. Or I even noticed my students in my classes, after the first couple of weeks, they all sit in the same seats. I'm always like, why is that? And it's like, well, I didn't get attacked by a snake here, so it's safe. Maybe evolutionarily it makes sense. But I'll sometimes halfway through the quarter say, okay, I want everyone to get up and switch sides and sit somewhere else. And students are like, this is terrible, like I have to move. But there's some benefits to having a different perspective, both physically and possibly mentally, that you're going to then remember things differently. And I know if I've taken a class in a different classroom every year, I can almost revisit each of those rooms and try and recall what I learned. But if you learn all in the same spot, there's a lot of interference. So I think there can be benefits to changing our habits, but it can be uncomfortable, especially at first.
I went to a lot of scientific meetings early in my career, and I would change seats after every break. It was the only way I could stay awake through all the talks. Some talks would naturally keep me awake, and some just wouldn't. I mean, they don't tell you this, but there are a lot of great talks at meetings, and there are often a lot of boring ones too. And you feel obligated to stay. Later in my career, I gave myself permission to get up and take a walk. But, so I do think that one learns differently, even if you just change the novelty of seat position.
Yeah. And I think that's a great example of, as you've gotten older, more experienced. First of all, you give yourself the leeway, like, hey, I can get up if this isn't working for me, or I want to see something else. But I've also learned, I learn better if I sit over here and then over here and then over here. And, those are some principles of memory that I think when you have this metacognitive insight, you can use it effectively. And I've learned, and I've seen my children learn, sometimes through mistakes, or sometimes this works better for me. And I think that's fascinating that we can do that.
It is interesting that almost everybody has an experience of saying, like a gaffe, like saying something stupid, or getting the wrong answer publicly. And the shame and the arousal that comes with that means, we're never going to forget the right answer, but we tend to remember the experience of embarrassment more. Than it sort of swamps the information somehow. And it just raises this question for me: is there a slight to severe emotional tag on every memory we have?
I think, part of our brain, like the amygdala that's involved in processing emotions is very active and is maintained throughout age. It's other parts of the brain tend to decline. So I think you're right that there can be an emotional attachment to a lot of our memories. Some of them are, bittersweet. Some of them are things we go back to for comfort. Sometimes we even change them a little bit so they fit the way we might have thought they happened.
I think that happens.
And that can be
writ large.
Sure, and that's part of our emotional tuning, like what makes us feel good. Some memories we don't want to revisit. Some, PTSD. There's a lot of research on how we can try and help people. So I think memory can be tuned that way, and a lot of it can have an emotional valence. And those are usually the memories that we cherish. They're the ones that we might be afraid of. I still remember, even though I'm not sure I remember it accurately, this Wizard of Oz. And now when my daughter was in Wizard of Oz, I was like, oh, this is such a great play. So I was thinking positively about it, even though at that time.
Of getting the line wrong.
Of getting the line
What
wrong.
do you think happened there?
I was probably just distracted. You do a lot of these dress rehearsals. Clearly I'm not an actor, but you do a lot of these rehearsing and you don't see the audience. You don't appreciate what's going on. Especially when you're young, all of a sudden, like, oh, there's all these people watching me, and I know what I'm supposed to say, but I'm not convinced most people even remembered it. I'm not even sure my parents were there, So I think we then think of it as a very strong emotional memory, but it guides us, and to me, that's a lasting memory in a sense because it kind of forced me to think, how does memory really work? I thought I knew how it worked. And I see a lot of people, studying in ways that aren't always as effective. We know some of the work, this is colleagues at UCLA who've studied desirable difficulties. How can you make learning kind of uncomfortable, but that you'll remember things better? And it goes against a lot of our intuitions. A lot of teachers will want to say, how can we make learning easier? And I think that's probably the first problem is you don't want it to be easy. You want it to be not a struggle, but a challenge so that you can appreciate just how difficult it is. So if I learned nothing else from that Wizard of Oz is now when I do a presentation or talk to other people, I love to see the room I'm going to be working in, or maybe, a scientific presentation. Maybe you've done this too. The night before, you're like, oh, this is the auditorium, and probably raises your, arousal level, but it makes you feel more comfortable than the day of.